A lot of black people don't know this because we tend to mind our business, but there's some serious diaspora wars going on between the Irish Americans and the Irish in Ireland. So basically, the Irish from Ireland, they are the only group of white people in this world that God created and forgot to install the racist chip in them. So naturally, you understand what that means. Look at the country Ireland. Go look at what they stand for. Look at their history. Well, the thing is, right now, Irish people in Ireland and Irish Americans are going at it. So Irish Americans are out here celebrating St. Patrick's Day. A lot of them, most of them voted Trump. You can see where all of this is going. Meanwhile, the Irish hate Trump. They so you got mad videos on the internet right now of Irish people. Like I seen this one video of this Irishman he actually painted an entire mural disowning Irish Americans, talking about get rid of the shamrock. You're not one of y'all. Want to know how crazy things are? They've decided to disown Conor McGregor and they now label him as an Irish American, which for them, that is the ultimate insult. Let me give you just a little bit of context. Hennessy, the alcoholic brand, is owned by an Irishman. It was founded by an Irishman, not a Frenchman. He was Irish. He was part of Napoleon's army. He was a Jacobite. Hennessy was the first corporate sponsor of the NAACP, and they've spent over 100 million in the 70s investing in black communities. And when they were selling to LVMH, in the contract it said it right there. They must continue supporting the black community. So in other words, yes, Irish people from Ireland, if you notice, they've supported the black community, they supported Africans, they supported the Black Panthers. The Irish from Ireland, not the Irish Americans, not those ones in Boston. No. Those ones in Boston are American. The Irish from Ireland, the ones that sound aye, those ones, yeah, yeah.
I don't like most Irish Americans because most of y'all are fucking racist, and I say this as a brown Irish American. It's not only because most of y'all's ancestors escaped oppression and G-side just to come over and continue and benefit from oppression over here. I think it's primarily because most of y'all expect birthright trips where you're welcomed with open arms to Ireland, while also fundamentally perpetuating the things that Ireland has suffered under for so long. As a kid, I performed Irish dancing every St. Paddy's Day, and I sang Sean Nos as Guelga with my curly hair and brown skin, and everyone was fucking confused. I'm not welcome to my own heritage, and I think that's probably why I get so confused as to why white Irish Americans are so confused when they don't get birthright citizenship or things like that. Anyway, these are thoughts that I'm having as people are making IRA content because there was that one show that is popular, so now they know about the fucking IRA, kind of. But I'm hoping that if resistance is baked into our DNA, that we would be able to identify when we are also the oppressors.
We don't want your parades. We don't want your shamrock shakes, your green, white and orange cupcakes, your dye the river green and let it be seen by the world that we love Ireland. You can keep it. You can keep your leprechaun hats and your novelty paddy caps. Swap it for a keffiyeh. Swap it for a keffiyeh and let your president see you take to the streets, but not to celebrate us. If you must do something in our name, then take to the streets to say never again. See, you can't celebrate a colonised nation while supporting the colonisation of another. And for Irish Americans, claiming Irish heritage, well, if you're not furiously opposed to this, then any Irishness you think you have is revoked, even if you didn't vote for him. Don't disrespect your ancestors who fled not just the potato blight, but the intentional starvation and genocide on this land to cram into coffin ships filled with the dying and the sick, in hopes of a better life once they arrived on the other side of the world. Oppose land grabs and forced displacement. Tell Trump he can't have Gaza for his seaside vacations. It's not up for grabs as a private holiday destination. It's a home. It's a heart. It's where the liberation of the whole of Palestine starts. From the river to the sea, the right to return will come to be.
Killing someone he knew. I went to Belfast last year and did a tour with a former IRA insurgent. He said when he was 14, British soldiers shot up his apartment block, killing someone he knew. He joined the IRA's youth wing after that, then joined the IRA when he was 18. He was vague, but said he participated in combat against the British forces, was captured and put in prison for 13 years, where he was on hunger strike for a good portion of them with Bobby Sands. Later, he was released and joined Sinn Féin and helped the peace movement. Now he runs a community group that focuses on getting young males from the most hardcore Protestant loyalist and Catholic Republican areas of Belfast to meet and organize trips abroad so they can get to know one another and help communities get along because of the inevitable future of a united Ireland. Why I say this now in regards to Gaza. Plenty of 14-year-olds will join Hamas, and the reason is because of the occupation. Speaking to IRL ex-insurgents and knowing my own family history, a lot of insurgents don't actually give a shit about the politics of their group. They join the fight, the occupation. Whoever is the best group to do it with, they fight with. Their motivations are mostly about fighting back against the occupation, avenging or protecting their families. It doesn't mean that they're all inhumane savages with a bloodlust for civilians. I'm not saying this terrible violence doesn't manifest itself on civilians, which it often does. But the framing of things like October 7 are that Hamas attacked civilians and brought the genocide on themselves, which ignores the context of the occupation. We see this in Britain too. British atrocities in Ireland are contextualized through them being a response to civilian casualties from the IRA, ignoring the context of 700 years of occupation in Ireland, including 300 where Irish Catholics were directly subjugated for their faith/Irish identity. So this is not to say the violence starts and ends with occupation and colonialism. Not contextualizing resistance movements only serves to absolve the occupier of their crimes. And that's precisely the reason why people do it. And I don't want you to be a sucker. Please understand. I always simply ask you one thing and one thing only. Just have a shred of charitability, especially if you've been in this community for a very long time. Please. Just have an ounce of charitability to what I'm saying without immediately assuming that I have some secret bias, that in my heart, that I'm actually a secret anti-Semite, and that I love the extremism. I love the fundamentalism. I want to throw gays off rooftops or whatever. Okay? Like, it blows my mind that people can be in this community for so long and not trust me on this when I talk about these issues. My goal is to offer a voice and a platform to things that you do not hear in American media. Okay? I think Ta-Nehisi Coates did a fantastic job with this as well in the message, and that's precisely what he has talked about extensively since the book came out in his book tour, right? That you can get this content, you can get pro-Israel perspectives, you can hear from every avenue of Israeli society, with the exception of the Israeli left usually, right? In every single outlet, in every single mainstream outlet, okay? You rarely ever see the humanity of Palestinians, not even just victims, not even just civilian victims on the side, but even Palestinian militancy, how they got there, why they got there, what are their motivations, what are their ambitions. You can feel comfortable casting them aside with this broad brush saying 76 years of occupation does not play a significant role in their opinion, in the way that they see the world. You can do that if you want, but it's just not true. And you are in that moment when you believe that, okay? In that moment when you believe that, you are a sucker. You are being played like a fiddle. That's it. And I think you can understand that.
Try and get up quicker.
40 years ago, I made a film about Divis Flats here in West Belfast. That's all that's left of the flats today. It used to be a death trap for the British Army. I remember interviewing a group of children who lived there. The memory of one has always haunted me. His name was Sean. He had the initials IRA tattooed on his knuckle.
Sean, how do you get on with the soldiers?
Don't like him. Never will like him. When I go up, I'm going to fight against him.
I often wondered what happened to Sean because of what his aspirations were. This year, I finally tracked him down. He's now 52. Sean.
Good to see you.
Sean. It's been a long time.
What?
It's been 40 years. 40 years.
You haven't changed a bit, Peter.
13 years after I first interviewed Sean, he was sentenced to life for the murder of a British soldier. This is a clip from the film I made at Divis all those years ago.
And you say that you'll fight the soldiers, huh?
When I grew up,
Why?
I'm going to fight for my country and die for it.
If I were to interview some children about the same age as you were when I interviewed you 40 years ago, and if one of those children said to me now that he wanted to fight and die for Ireland, what would you say to him?
I would advise him to forget it, because I know a lot of people who died and they thought they were fighting and dying for their country, but it never worked out that way. It never worked out.
So what did the IRA achieve in its so-called war?
They're running government, they're running storm it.
But there's no United
No, but
Ireland.
we'll get there. I'm sure we will.
Why are you so confident?
I have every faith in Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. Full faith in them.
The tragedy is that generations of children have been victims of a conflict by which they were conditioned, some to become killers in the name of causes that fueled the war.
The flag we all revere, we'll fight and fall beneath its walls like Irish volunteers. When I was driven from my home by an oppressor's hand, I cut me sticks and greased me brogues and came out to this land. I found a home and many friends and some that I loved dear. My chambers I'll stick to them like bricks as an Irish volunteer. So fill your glasses up, me boys, and drink a hearty cheer to the land of our adoption and the Irish volunteers. My name is Tam.
There's been a lot of discourse about Irish Americans on this app, and as someone who is from the United States but lives in Ireland, who is not Irish, not Irish American, not anything, I have a perspective on this that I don't think anyone else has said, and if they have, I haven't seen it. And that is part of the reason that Irish people are so defensive of their culture. Irish people that live here on this island is because until very, very recently, they were not allowed to enjoy many parts of their own culture. They were told it was illegitimate. Their language was squashed. Their peoplehood was put down and discouraged, and they have been fighting to regain their individuality post-colonialism since then. It's very, very recent. You can still find things from England here in Ireland from when England had colonized them. And there's this big revitalization of the Irish language, of the Irish culture right now. And so when you have people who during their grandparents' lifetimes were told, hey, your existence, we don't need that. Okay, we don't want your language, we don't want your culture, it's not as good as, it must be ruled by the overlords over here, your religion, all of that, not good. They're fighting back. So when someone from another country tries to claim stereotypes and pieces of their culture, naturally, they get a little upset. Also not delegitimizing the idea of Irish American. It does exist, and I do think that if you come on the internet and claim to be Irish, you need to be actually Irish, not from somewhere else. And Irish people are very proud of their culture. There's an Irish pub in every city, right? I think you can do both the things. I think you can enjoy it and be proud of your heritage and your ethnicity without claiming to be something you're not. Because here on this island, they've been fighting really hard for a really long time for that piece of their culture.
So how old were you when you found out that the Irish potato famine was largely caused by the British? Because Irish Catholics were prohibited from owning land and had to rent from British landlords, which meant that they could be evicted at any time. And the potato blight actually came from the Americas and was brought to Ireland by the British, caused the potatoes to rot, and British relief efforts actually made things worse, because the British imported grain, but Ireland lacked the mills to process it. Then the British also placed a ship of grain sent by the people of Massachusetts in storage to prevent it from disturbing trade, because in 1844 there was a financial crisis. All of this together caused over 1 million Irish to die, and caused millions of Irish to flee to the United States and Canada. I was 33. Later.
Why were the Irish not considered white when they first immigrated to the United States? It would be inaccurate to say that Irish folks were ever suffering the same indignities and dehumanization as Black or Indigenous folks on that ranking system of white supremacy, but they definitely weren't right at the top with whiteness. And we can see this under the myth of Irish enslavement. Irish folks were never enslaved under chattel slavery the same way that African folks were. Irish people did have to endure forced labor, but it wasn't passed on by a matter of them being Irish. In 1662, there was a law in the Virginia colonies called Partus Sequitur Ventrum, which basically said that if a woman is enslaved and she's an African woman, then her children are automatically enslaved under a condition of being Black. What the Irish suffered in the United States was called indentured servitude. Indentured servitude was a system of forced labor where the person had a contract and was usually indentured or forced to work without pay in order to repay a debt. So yes, it was slavery, but it wasn't chattel slavery because you could not buy, sell, or trade an indentured servant. You could buy their debts and then have them work for you to repay that debt, but it was totally different than chattel slavery, but it was still messed up. Indentured servitude and chattel slavery were both outlawed in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, except as a punishment for crime, which is a whole other conversation to be had. Both systems were horrible, but there's a little difference in the amount of oppression and the racialized context behind them. So when we say that Irish people were not white, what we're actually saying is that they didn't have the same privileges afforded by white supremacy that white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and other white peoples from Europe were afforded. Irish people in the United States faced ethnic, classist, religious, and xenophobic discrimination. That's true. But the way that Irish people were assimilated into whiteness or finally viewed as accepted into whiteness is a really interesting history too. It's also a little racist. Race is a construct or a human invention that was created to rank and differentiate and separate people based on our natural human differences. Natural human differences are real, like differences in our skin tone, hair texture, facial features, etc., but that's not what race is. Race is all of the politics and meaning associated and tied to those. As Dr. Dorothy Roberts says, race is a political category that has been disguised as a biological one. When you're categorized by the system that is race, you are racialized, and people have been racialized differently depending on what the politics and society that have been controlling our behavior needed at the time. Starting in around the 1840s, Irish people were subjected to similar racialization and stereotypes that Black people were, saying who was and wasn't desirable, who acted uncivilized, and other things of that nature that are incredibly racist. From the jump in the US, Irish folks were allowed to go to white-only spaces, were allowed to marry and have children with other white people, but the issue here really is that they didn't have the same privileges and rights as other white folks. Irish folks already had an incredible amount of passing privilege, meaning that they would be perceived as white until it was maybe demonstrated that they were Catholic instead of Protestant, or that they started speaking with an accent. An excellent book that talks about all of this is called How the Irish Became White, and I recommend reading it. Ever since 1878, literal US courts have litigated the issue of whether certain groups are white or not. The unfortunate fact about how Irish folks became white in the context of the US is that they started contributing to the oppression of Black Americans. It's kind of difficult to articulate, but essentially, early Irish immigrants started to demonstrate that they could be more harsh and more brutal in their treatment of Black Americans than the people who were already considered white. This happened during chattel slavery, where many Irish immigrants did not own slaves, but became overseers and essentially carried out the will of the slave-owning masters. And then this continued in places like New York and Boston, where Irish immigrants became in control of the police force. By organizing politically and becoming tools of white supremacy, Irish folks were allowed to assimilate into whiteness. Irish American history provides a pretty unique example about how permeable and inconsistent the rules of white supremacy can be. So while today Irish folks are perceived to be white, even that's problematic because not everyone in Ireland is white. A person's perceived or actual connection to whiteness, as well as the extent to which they uphold white supremacy, are all privileged in the system that we exist in, which is white supremacy. Checking and using our privilege, as well as learning our actual history and why we have these categories in the first place, are all phenomenal tactics to start disrupting white supremacy. This is not about being ashamed of your history or trying to rewrite it. It's about knowing the truth and learning how it affects your present.
I came to London with Micro Disney, which was then just two of us, in 1983 in the summer. And the reason why we came was that there was no particular music scene in Cork or indeed in Ireland very much at that point, and it seemed best to just get out really. Well, the cultural reception afforded by the English to their guests, visitors in the late 80s is an extremely frosty one. The old London Irish stereotype was of the navvy with the red face and the baggy trousers. going out and spending all his wages on Thursday night and getting arrested and beating up his friends and ending up in the gutter, eventually sleeping outside Finsbury Park or something like that. And I mean, those people still do exist here, and I mean, it's more horrifying now than it can ever have been, really, because I mean, immigration from Ireland has affected all classes. Now you've got the younger people, and the stereotype there is the person with the peroxided hair and the bottle of cider on Thursday night, spinning the gyro.
What do I think of the Irish?
What do Irish men do?
I think the Irish in general in London, some of them get a bad deal. You have this thing in Camden Council, where a lot of them, because of Camden's housing policies in general, I couldn't give you a good exposition of it, but because of their housing policies, a lot of them are being sent back to Ireland, which I don't think is a very good idea. They couldn't get away with that with Bengali families or Afro-Caribbean families, so I don't think they should do it to Irish families.
My nan was Irish, my granddad was Irish. So, we're Irish in me.
But the Irishman, he's a hard worker and he likes his drink. And to me, it's a damn disgrace that the Irish and the English still fighting over something that they can compromise and come to terms with. It's a shame. I don't know who's handling this, but then it should be looked into, you know.
I've got some Irish friends. Some of them are okay, some of them ain't.
What's up, y'all? So it is Black History Month, and today we're going to take you to Ireland to learn a bit about Black American history that I discovered during my trip to Ireland. So one of the things I did not expect to see in Ireland was the Barack Obama Plaza. Turns out the Irish love the Obamas. Why? Apparently, Barack Obama's great-great-grandfather lived in Ireland. He lived in Ireland and immigrated to the U.S. in 1850, and the Irish have just been obsessed with the Obamas ever since. Despite how cool it is, the Obamas having a plaza in Ireland is not the Black history we're talking about. The real Black history that I learned was learned here at the Museum of Literature in Ireland. Turns out when he was 27 years old, Frederick Douglass left the U.S. and went to Ireland for 4 months. It was a part of a 2-year tour where he would travel through the UK and Ireland to give anti-slavery speeches and champion freedom from slavery. If you read his accounts from his time in Ireland, Frederick Douglass talks about this was the first time in his life he was happy and he felt like a man and not cattle. Turns out when he was 27 years old, Frederick Douglass left the U.S. and went to Ireland for 4 months. It was a part of a 2-year tour where he would travel through the UK and Ireland to give anti-slavery speeches and champion freedom from slavery. If you read his accounts from his time in Ireland, Frederick Douglass talks about this was the first time in his life he was happy and he felt like a man and not cattle.
In honor of St. Patrick's Day, I thought I'd share the 4 things that Irish Americans say that piss me off the most. Number 4, calling a drink an Irish car bomb. Inappropriate. We can make that joke. You cannot. Number 3, Irish twins. Offensive. Number 2, and this one has gained incredible popularity over the last couple of years, Irish goodbye. That's not an Irish goodbye, that's a Houdini. An Irish goodbye takes at least an hour because you have to say goodbye to everyone individually. And number 1, calling St. Patrick's Day, St. Patrick, Paddy, calling it Patty's Day. Patty. Sure, you might as well just spit on his grave.
Americans that think they're Irish. Americans that think they're Irish are definitely not Irish, but it's not their fault for getting mixed up. The tourism industry commissioned movies like The Quiet Man and Banshees of Inisherin to create a false memory in Bert from Wisconsin's Middle American consciousness, manipulating him into feeling a personal connection towards orange jumpers, shamrocks and sheep. But on a positive note, he just found out that Ireland isn't actually in the UK. Ireland isn't actually in the UK. He just found out that Ireland isn't actually in the UK. In the modern world, Ireland has been platformed as a timeless, otherworldly tourist gaze, a playground for Americans to explore their Irish heritage in the land of 1,000 welcomes. It's the friendliest place in the world, as long as you're open carrying. a credit card that you're willing to max out in the Leprechaun Museum?
I'm from Connecticut in the States, but my father's from Tyrone, so I'm Irish.
Okay. Americans that think they're Irish are so cute. They're a naive, hopeful species that think a random Irish person is going to lead them to a pot of gold. But in the current climate, they'd be lucky to find a pot to piss in. The gold is urine. On the global level, Ireland is being airbrushed into a place that transcends national identity, cleaning up the colonial wound in the hopes that it doesn't go gangrene before St. Patty's Day, when the busloads of Minnesota natives will come here and start looking for a place that sells green Guinness. These American tourists live action role play as Irish people, and they do a pretty successful job until they open their mouths and ask you for directions to the Book of Kelly's.
We know all about the fact that y'all aren't part of the UK.
Oh, you know that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
We
good.
watched a Netflix special on it right before we came.
Oh, is that,
To get-
you
to
found
get in
out
touch
from
with our-
Netflix?
to get in touch with our Irish roots.
Americans that think they're Irish see Ireland as a blank canvas into which they can splurge their all-American seed. Which is why, as soon as they step off the plane, they waste no time in telling everyone about how great it is to be back in the motherland, before walking directly into a self-proclaimed Irish pub and handing over a tenner for a pint of watered-down stout to celebrate their 23andMe diagnosis of 3% Irish. Our bodies are made up of mostly water, but that doesn't mean we all get to be a bottle of Ballygown. Americans that think they're Irish claim to be pro-women, but as soon as they come to the Molly Malone statue, they instantly start touching her tits. Americans that think they're Irish are highly creative beings. They're completely undeterred by the parameters of reality. They refuse to let being born and raised in the USA get in the way of their imaginary Irishness. Therefore, Americans that think they're Irish come here to find a new national sense of self, because their current one is just guns, double glazed donuts, and Donald Trump. However, Americans that think they're Irish swear they're different than all the other American tourists. They claim higher levels of Hibernian authenticity because they one time Googled the Wolfe Tones and they know the O'Malleys from Cork. The O'Malleys from Cork who emigrated to Boston 200 years ago to become cops. I don't know them,